Hi there, and welcome back to Energy Flux On Air. I'm your host, Seb Kennedy, founding editor of Energy Flux, the energy newsletter analysing European natural gas and global LNG markets through the lens of Europe's energy transition and global geopolitics. I'm recording this on the 18th of March in the evening, London time, shortly after the presidents of the United States and Russia have agreed to a temporary 30-day partial ceasefire in the conflict in Ukraine. This ceasefire focuses exclusively on energy infrastructure, and it means that Russia has agreed to stop bombarding Ukrainian energy infrastructure as part of its assault on the country. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has apparently indicated that he is on board with such a ceasefire. And so this is quite a major development in this 3-year conflict. This is the first time there's been any sort of ceasefire. So I thought I would put out a very quick hot take podcast just to share some initial thoughts on what this means and what it doesn't mean. I think that the focus on energy is significant. Why did Russia oppose a longer ceasefire? Donald Trump went into the talks proposing a total ceasefire for 30 days, and Putin resisted that. And you have to ask why. Why agree only to stop bombarding Ukrainian energy infrastructure while still fighting Ukrainian troops on the ground? And I think that the only conclusion we can reach is that Russia has the most to gain from continuing to fight. It really looks like Russia is struggling, I think, to continue fighting, because remember that Ukraine has been bombarding Russian refineries. It's been using long-range missiles to attack into Russian territory and has taken out quite a few Russian refineries. So I'd imagine that that's weighing on Russia's ability to keep fueling its military advancements in Ukrainian territory. But at the same time, Ukraine is in a much weakened position. And so Russia has a lot to gain from continuing to fight. So I think they're willing to give up their bombardment of Ukrainian gas pipelines and substations and power generation facilities in order to extract a halt from Ukraine on its bombardment of Russia's ability to refine petroleum products and fuel its military advancements. So this is not really a ceasefire. This is like a tactical agreement to stop bombarding Ukraine in order to get a much bigger prize, which is the ability to keep advancing on the battlefield and to keep taking more and more of Ukraine's territory. However, there's another way of looking at this, which is that this is a focus on energy infrastructure. Why would Trump and Putin look at energy infrastructure as the first sort of focus for a ceasefire? And I think the way to look at this is that a resumption of flows of natural gas from Russia through Ukraine into Europe is a key objective for both sides, like US and Russia, because remember that Ukraine is kind of semi-excluded from these talks. This is really just Trump and Putin getting together and deciding bilaterally how to broker a peace deal in Ukraine to the exclusion of one of the sides in the conflict, which is just kind of mind-boggling that they think that they can agree any sort of lasting peace on those terms, but I digress. That's another story. So I think, reading it from that perspective, that, energy is the kind the first priority for the scope of a ceasefire. Why are we protecting the energy infrastructure at all? And that's got to be because both sides want Russian energy to keep flowing to global or at least European markets. And the primary vector for that is going to be natural gas. It's going to be gas transits through Ukraine. And I think that's how the market is reading this as well, because if you look at the traded price of natural gas futures on the Dutch Title Transfer Facility, which is the benchmark trading hub for natural gas in Europe, the TTF last traded at about 40 euros per megawatt hour, which is down from above 42 euros on Friday and 41 on Monday. So I think that the market is reading this as bearish. I must say that the TTF is already kind of on a bearish run at the moment. We've seen a very, very strong sell-off in European natural gas futures in recent weeks, which I've spoken about at length on this podcast. And I've explained how in the previous episode, how I thought that geopolitics was going to become the driving force, overtake regulation. Regulatory changes drove a big sell-off to begin with, and now geopolitics is kind of in the driving seat, and both are kind of on the balance of the facts bearish for European gas. So what's happening is that the investment funds are essentially reading this as meaning that at some point we're going to get more gas supply into Europe as part of some putative peace deal in Ukraine, and that will obviously produce looser market conditions, which will lower the price. So that eventuality, while still remaining a long way away, it does look like the market really is trying to price it in now, and that's really been kind of the modus operandi of trading on TTF by the investment funds. They try to front run every single piece of news, and respond in the most exaggerated way to the most improbable of outcomes. So when there was a lot of chatter recently about the idea of Nord Stream 2, or one string of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline entering service and being bought up by American investors, then the TTF seemed to be moving in response to that, even though it's an incredibly outlandish proposal that is, on the balance of probabilities, extremely unlikely to manifest. But you see that's how the market is. It will respond in this exaggerated way to developments that are at best highly speculative. And so by that measure, then having an actual energy ceasefire, which has been telegraphed to the whole world with Vladimir Putin's buy-in, that's like, compared to some of the things that have moved the market recently, this is actually quite a significant and concrete piece of news. Even though the US cannot, unilaterally or bilaterally with Russia force European companies to buy Russian gas, it seems like that's not really being seen as the obstacle that it is. And I think the view is that Trump is so much in the ascendancy at the moment that his ability to get people to the negotiating table and to negotiate away obstacles to him achieving his objectives is such that it won't impede those energy flows, and that we will see these kind of looser market conditions prevail. And that's quite a brave trade to make, I'd say. But at the same time, the European gas market really does need a bearish story to tell. The investment funds had amassed such incredibly, excessively bullish positions, which I've spoken about before, that they need to deconstruct those in a sort of orderly fashion. And having these geopolitical headlines to trade on provides a kind of cover, if you like, to unwind some of that excessively bullish fervor which gripped the market up until just a few short weeks ago. Anyway, that's by the by, really. I think just focusing on the story at hand about this ceasefire agreement, there's been quite a lively chat on the Energy Flux subscriber chat, which I'd encourage you to participate in. If you're not already subscribed to the newsletter, then go to www.energyflux.news, sign up for emails, and you'll receive a link to the subscriber chat. One reader was saying that, quite astutely, I think, Putin's not willing to stop the fighting on the front, which is the point I made at the start, especially now that Trump helped him kick the Ukrainians out of Kursk by denying them intelligence sharing. This, of course, is the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, where they occupied a slice of Russian territory. They've been holding on to that as a kind of bargaining chip, and it's notable that the Ukrainian forces have been essentially surrounded, it seems, or they claim to be surrounded, shortly after that disastrous press briefing with Zelensky in the Oval Office, after which Trump temporarily suspended military intelligence sharing with Ukraine in like a sort of tantrum, it seems. And then, like, literally the day after, then Russian forces started encircling the Ukrainian forces in Kursk. Anyway, this really carries on by saying that Trump's quote-unquote infrastructure bombing ceasefire accomplishes two things at once. One, it gives Trump something he can go out and present as a deal-making win. And two, it gives Russians a reprieve from highly effective Ukrainian bombing and sabotage of their refineries, oil depots, pipelines, etc. This essentially chimes with the way I've been reading this to begin with. which is that it's really a kind of a tactical agreement, and like for Putin as well, like he can kind of make out as if he has this willingness to move towards a peace settlement or a ceasefire agreement by saying that he's going to stop bombarding Ukrainian gas pipelines and power plants, but it's hardly like a benevolent thing to do, to stop hitting somebody over the head when they're lying on the floor in a pool of blood. But that's really what it amounts to, and it's really nothing of a concession at all when you look at it like that. But then, like nothing that Putin is willing to hand over at this stage is anything remotely resembling a concession. It's only ever going to be tactical, because he thinks he has the upper hand. He has the world's most powerful leader essentially backing him, and his opponent is being subjected to a maximum pressure campaign from the White House, and even being falsely accused of having started the conflict in the first place, and yada yada yada, all of these kind of Trump talking points that are at best a misrepresentation of the facts, and at worst just lie after lie after lie about the kind of core causes for this tragic state of affairs in Ukraine. The other aspect that's worth discussing here is whether either side will actually adhere to any ceasefire at all. It's one thing for Trump to say that Putin's not going to attack Ukrainian infrastructure, but how much credence can you really give that promise? Would you put your own home on the line, or your own family on the line, on the basis of a Putin promise to be nice? And you only have to look over to the situation in the Middle East, where the ceasefire in Gaza seems to be crumbling very quickly after Israeli fighter jets unleashed a new wave of bombardment across the Gaza Strip, which has essentially destroyed what remained of a fragile truce that came into effect in January. So it's not hard to imagine Putin agreeing to this, and just days into this 30-day ceasefire to continue his bombardment, and just kind of claim that black is white, that he didn't do anything, or he was provoked or something, and then for us to go back to business as usual of both sides bombing each other to smithereens. It's worth mentioning before I sign off that the destruction and human suffering caused by Russia's concerted campaign of destruction that it's been meting out upon energy assets in Ukraine is phenomenal. The way that the Russian military has targeted power generation for civilian use has been nothing short of devastating for Ukrainians. It's worth also highlighting that since the transit of Russian gas through Ukrainian gas transmission infrastructure halted on New Year's Day, then there's been a really concerted attempt to destroy Ukraine's ability to produce gas in its own territory for its own domestic purposes. And that is the subject of a forthcoming deep dive article that will be published in Energy Flux very soon. So if you want to get the real backstory on Russia's campaign of destruction of the Ukrainian gas system, then I'd encourage you to subscribe to Energy Flux. Go to energyflux.news, sign up for email updates, and you will be the first to read it. Anyway, that's it for now. No time for a Q&A. It's nearly midnight here, and I don't want to sit on this any longer than necessary, because who knows, by the time it goes out, maybe the situation will have changed, maybe the market will have moved. If it has, I'll keep you updated. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.